Hi, welcome back to McNally's Musket Missive. I'm Harry McNally, and these are muskets. So as we talked about last episode, the Model 1842 was America's first percussion musket, and that begs the question, what do we do with all these rockbangers? At the adoption of the Model 1842, there were about 1 million flintlocks in the U.S., either in state or federal armories for storage or in the hands of the troops themselves, and they were all rendered obsolete at the adoption of percussion arms. So, clearly the answer is, let's convert them. No sense letting them all go to waste. The U.S. government split them into 4 different categories. The first were serviceable arms made since 1831. No inspection was needed for these first-class weapons. They would just be converted and put into storage. Second-class arms were those made between 1821 and 1831, which were still serviceable. Those would be converted and put into general use. Third-class arms comprised those made between 1812 and 1820, and they were considered to be unsuitable for conversion. However, they remained in storage in the event of a national emergency and a large supply of arms were needed in a hurry. Then there were the fourth class. Those were those made before 1812, and all unserviceable arms of newer manufacture that were unworthy of repair. Those were to be sold off. In 1848, they conducted a survey of about 700,000 muskets and found that 300,000 of them were first class, 76,000 were second class, 23,000 were third class, and about 110,000 were fourth class muskets. The method of conversion chosen for the federal arsenals was the cone-in-barrel or Belgian conversion, as you can see, both of these are. What they would do is they would machine down the flash pan and then fill the cavity with a piece of brass. They would fill the touch hole on the barrel. They would fill the lock plate, fill the holes in the lock plate where the old rock banging components used to go. And then they drilled and tapped a percussion cone into the barrel at about a 25-degree angle, set into a cold-formed boss. And I'll have up-close, detailed photos of that later on in the episode. To facilitate these modifications, Harper's Ferry made 6 sets of machines and gauges between 1847 and 1848. 1 set remained at Harper's Ferry, one was sent to Springfield, and the remaining 4 were sent to 4 of the federal facilities where arms and equipment were kept, places like St. Louis and, I've never been able to pronounce this correctly, Watervliet? Anyway, once Harper's Ferry was finished converting the arms they had on hand, they sent their machinery to another one of these facilities, and they just kind of moved them around as needed to make sure that as many of these muskets could be converted, because they're still good muskets. They still work, and the Model 1816/22 and 1840s, once you convert them to percussion, are, for all intents and purposes, pretty much the same as the Model 1840. The Belgian method wasn't the only way of converting a rockbanger into a percussion musket. It was just the one that the U.S. government preferred. And they and state governments also contracted out a lot of the work, and different contractors had different methods of doing things. H&P, for example, created a bolster on the barrel, which I think required them to cut the barrel down and put a new breech end on it. Remington would use the Maynard tape primer system on their percussion conversions, and I'll go into more detail with this next episode. It was an attempt to kind of skip the priming stage of the musket, which is very much a fine motor control process. And anybody who's been under stress knows that fine motor control goes out the window when adrenaline starts pumping, like in combat. You'd had drum conversions, just all different kinds. And conversion of these arms would continue well into the American Sengoku period. At the outbreak of the Civil War, a lot of these percussion conversions were pressed into service, and a lot of them saw service until well into the war. For example, when Grant took Vicksburg in July of 1863, his men were armed mostly with smoothbore muskets, and they exchanged their smoothbores for Confederate rifled muskets, probably Enfields, I think, and then sent their smoothbores up as captured rebel arms. So these saw service probably throughout the entire war, especially when, as I mentioned last episode, in the eyes of the government, a percussion smoothbore is a percussion smoothbore. They saw no distinction between a conversion and a Model 1842, which is why the numbers for rifled conversion in 1842s don't really exist. A percussion is a percussion. And speaking of rifled conversions, more than a few of the percussion conversions were rifled as well. You know, you'd have the rear sight added, you'd have a rifle sight, your dished-in ramrod. Now, the problem was that firing a rifle creates a lot more back pressure in the barrel than firing a smoothbore does. So as a result, especially with the cone and barrel system, you ended up having the cones being launched off the barrels because the back pressure was too great. So you don't really see a lot of rifled percussion conversions. They do exist. And I would imagine that some of the contractor modifications were a lot hardier than the cone and barrel. They were not really meant for that kind of back pressure. Just rifling came later. So let's get, we saw this one, so let's get this guy into the light box, and I'll do a better job of highlighting the differences between the lock mechanism of this guy and a rock banger. Alright, so here we have the Model 1840 percussion conversion. It's another Charlottesville derivative. We've seen a bunch of these already, so I don't need to go too much into detail. As I talked about in the episode about the 1840, the main difference about this one is that new comb to the stock and the new nose cap and ramrod. Alright, here we go. Looking at the lock plate, you can see where the parts of the rock banger used to go, and I have a picture of the rock banger here for comparison. So we've got the battery, or frizzen as it's called. That's the part that the flint strikes to make the sparks. The sparks go into the pan. You've got a spring to actuate the battery, and that spring is also held in place by a pin. Moving forward, I've got this annotated version of the previous photo. Number one being the screw that held the battery in place. Number two, the screw for the frizzen spring itself, and number three was that pin I was talking about. All of those were filled and filed flush with the rest of the lock plate, along with the pan itself, as you can see, and you can just make out that little half moon, that crescent moon shape from where the pan itself was filled in with a piece of brass and also cut flush with the rest of it. Moving forward, you know, same barrel bands. This is Charlottesville derivative. At the end, we've got the new nose cap with the front sight on the front instead of on the back, and the little shapely cutout there. Bayonet lug's been moved to the bottom of the barrel, and the trumpet-headed ramrod. Other side, we've got the new simplified lock side plate. The remains of some cartouches, which are always nice to have on these muskets. They usually wore off from just simple handling, so that they're still present on a musket of this age is always nice. Here we've got the barrel date of 1841, which doesn't match the lock plate date of 1842, but that's common. VP Eagle Head proof markings, and the new hammer. Okay, and here I've got a picture of that cold-formed boss that I was talking about on my 1816/22. I unfortunately forgot to get a good photo of it on the 1840, which is a shame because that barrel's in better condition and we'd see things better. But you can just make out that raised portion, that raised flat portion that the cone is set into. That's that cold-formed boss I was talking about. Just gives it a more stable place for the cone to be set into. And that's about it for this. Now, as I've talked about repeatedly, the records don't really reflect the difference between a percussion conversion and a Model 1842. So what we do know is that percussion muskets of every flavor served throughout the American Civil War. At the outbreak, for example, the Irish Brigade preferred a smoothbore musket because you could fire buck and ball through it. It was just this buck and ball being a standard 69 caliber rifle ball with also buckshot. It was a devastating weapon at close range, but as the war progressed, they found that the ranges at which engagements were happening were going further and further out. And so eventually they exchanged the smoothbores for rifle muskets, and the smoothbores became the arms of rear echelon troops, veteran reserve troops, duties that required you to be armed but didn't require you to engage targets at distance. Non-frontline duty, I should say. So that's everything for this episode. I hope you enjoyed that. I want to thank my Patreon patrons for continuing to support me, and please consider being one of them. Also, please like this video. If you haven't already, please subscribe. The algorithm needs its fuel. So that's everything I have for today. Thanks for watching. Bye.